We're back at it again. It's the State of Football here, part 16, each and every day here, brought to you by the NFL Draft Bio. I am your host, Rick Saratella, telling it like it is when it comes to the NFL Draft and all matters football since 2002. It's what we do. It's another all-star panel of hot topics, industry experts, and issues that you want to hear about, not the mainstream media fluff. That's what we do here. And I got a couple of announcements in the works, but we're going to start off with a big announcement right now. We are keeping this show ongoing for the entire year, for the football season, along with John Murphy, my co-host. Will be here each and every day. We've extended it. No more part 16, 17. Yes, it will continue, but it's not a limited edition. This is going to be an everyday mainstream show, and we are going to take this morning talk show to a larger platform in the coming weeks here. Stay tuned. Keep it locked for that. We are joined by Inside the League creator, founder, CEO, and newest book publisher, Neil Stratton. We'll get into his new book that's available now on Scout Speak. Good morning, Neil.
Good morning, Rick. Is now time to ask for an extension on my contract? I didn't know we were going to be going all year. It's,
yeah.
I think I need my agent on here.
The check is in the mail, my friend. Back over to Ralph Ventry, of course, Assistant Commissioner for the Northeast Conference. Of course, all things football, all things sports. I don't think there's a more interactive commissioner in all of sports. He is on my write-in ballot for the presidential candidacy. He is Ralph Ventry. Welcome back, Ralph.
Glad to be here, Rick. And I haven't even gotten my first check yet, so I don't know what you're talking about, an extension.
Hey,
but I'm glad to be here and chop it up with you guys on Monday morning. It's a beautiful day, and really, what more can you ask for? A little coffee, a little football. Let's chop it up, baby.
Always a pleasure to chop it up with Ralph Ventry. It's what we do. And Ralph, I think that check got lost in the mail along with my stimulus package that we're still waiting for here in New Jersey. And again, my co-host each and every morning here on the State of Football, he is John Murphy, Vice President of Player Personnel for the Toronto Argonauts, fresh off a flight from Toronto. We welcome him back into the States down there in his hometown of New Orleans, just in time for hurricane season, Murph.
Awesome. Yeah. So we didn't get any losses on the field, so we'll see how we do off the field in the coming days. And for all the fans who took the under, it was 62 shows that I guessed before I would get home. We only made it through 16. So if you took the under, you made some money. And typical of a former lineman, and during the summertime, asking for free checks.
Well, guys, let's start off with some of the hot topics that have occurred since Friday. I think the big news coming down the wire, I'll stick right there with you, Murphy, in New Orleans. Of course, Neil Stratton in Houston, Ralph Ventry in Jersey, in my home state here, botching the laboratories. Only 5 laboratories that the NFL is currently using in the country, John. 77 false positive tests affecting 11 different organizations. You saw teams begin to shut down practice, limit practice, have to retest these individuals. And in a way, it might have been a blessing in disguise, because this is bound to happen at some point during the season. So the NFL's kind of got a test run here in terms of an emergency situation during the pandemic.
Right. And I think they've already come out and said, one of the things that they've already seen with this is if you're playing on Sunday, that your initial round of testing will now take place 48 hours prior to that game instead of 24 hours, so that if there is something like this that goes on, that they will then be able to substitute the test that they did for the quicker turnaround, of the test. I think you've also seen that if you get a false positive, they're allowing you to take then one regular test and one quicker test. And so that if you get a negative, you can take the quicker test, get another negative, and get back on the field. So I think, they're still kind of handling this the best way you can. I don't think there's really any fault, in what you're doing. When you're talking about the number of testing that the NFL is doing in terms of over the weeks and on daily basis and stuff, you should have expected something along these lines to happen. And like I said, I think even from a testing facility standpoint, it's kind of a black eye, but it's a black eye that you got during a boxing match, right? It's not something intentional. I think it's something that you had to expect if you're doing this number of tests with this amount of information you want back, as fast as possible. Like you said, long run, it's a win-win, I think, for all sides. Temporarily, it's a loss for those teams that may have missed a day or day and a half, with certain people. But I think you've seen it, right? You saw how the Chargers, were able to make sense of it and handle it and actually use the false positive of Coach Ryan's son, to implicate, letting their team and their players know what was going on, interact with the coaching staff to let them know what was going on, and say, hey, someone who's doing everything the right way can still get a false positive, and also have a very honest position coach say, hey, I got to be prepared to coach the 8 or 10 guys that are on in this room right now, and you guys got to be ready to prepare to play a game with or without any of us in the room, including myself as the position coach. I thought that's a very telling sign, because we've mentioned it a number of times. The organizations and the teams that can last through this the longest, adapt over and over again to what's going on, you're going to have to just be able to jump back into practice today and, not worry about the day and a half missed. And if it comes up, again, you're going to have to be, ready to play with or without the guys that might have to sit out.
Yeah, and that goes for players or coaches. You see what the Redskins kind of have going on due to the Ron Rivera cancer diagnosis. There's a contingency plan. Hey, guys, if I'm here, it's according to plan. If not, well, hey, Coach Del Rio, next man up mentality. And in a way, they've created a kind of contingency plan that, coaching staffs are going to have to also have intact. I'll go over to Ralph Ventry there in New Jersey. Ralph, we saw, what this can do to a team, shut down your practices, but it's a chaotic kind of season. That's what we're in store for. So when 11 teams get impacted, I'm looking at the Bill Parcells quote, like, hey, these teams are in a situation that they've never seen before, because there's only going to be 14 padded practices, right? 14 padded practice. Bill Parcells said, I used to do that in 10 days. So especially these, and it's the investment the NFL has made, $75 million towards the testing. And again, they can afford to test guys regularly, daily, multiple times if needed. And that's what kind of separates them from being able to do this versus college programs.
Without a doubt, the NFL is at a tremendous advantage because of their financial resources and because they're dealing with professionals and adults who realize what's at stake, maybe more so than a college student. Not to say that college students aren't responsible and they don't care about football and they don't care about succeeding, because that's certainly not the case. I can point to a number of college athletes out there who are really serious about their craft and really grateful to have the opportunity that they have. But the college lifestyle is a lot different than the professional lifestyle, and that is an advantage for the NFL during this era of COVID. With that said, there were a couple questions, myself as a big NFL fan, I follow the news closely, and I had a couple of questions that arose yesterday. And one of them was, what if this was a Saturday going into week one, a Sunday NFL game day, and the Buffalo Bills, Josh Allen was one of the 6 players who had the false positive for the Buffalo Bills, starting quarterback. Now, you find out he's got this positive test, but then they gave the athletes point of care test right there on the spot, and those tests came back negative. If this were week one, would Josh Allen be allowed to play because he tested negative with the point of care test? Or would he have to follow the current NFL protocol, which says you have to have 2 consecutive negative point of care tests? So, which would basically rule him out for Sunday. But if the NFL now realizes that, hey, a lab issue can arise, we're pretty certain it was a lab issue, we ran another test on this guy at the site, he's negative, can he strap up and go on Sunday? I would hope the answer is yes. I know the Bills actually yesterday, they took a cautious approach, but they didn't panic. Right away, Brandon Beane jumped on a call, and with the media, explained the situation. He said, we're delaying the start of practice for an hour today. We're pretty sure it's just a lab issue. With that said, we're holding some guys out of practice. We're keeping some guys away from the facility, but the Buffalo Bills still ran a full practice yesterday with Matt Barkley as the number one quarterback. So to be honest with you, I'm glad it happened now and not on September 12th.
It's an interesting point. I want to go over to you, Neil, because I just want to say the NFL was down to only 4 positive players in the entire league. All of a sudden, 77, and it was like, hey, well, something's not adding up here. But to Ralph's point, the quarantine quarterback, it might be even more valuable than your backup quarterback.
I mean, are we all still happy that there's no preseason games this year? I mean, I think everyone on this call understands the value of preparation and dress rehearsals and live fire and all those kind of things. I mean, there was much waving of hands and rejoicing, what have you, in the media when all the preseason was canceled because that's such a money grab or whatever. Guys, this preseason games have a value. I'm not saying maybe you reduce them, whatever. I understand they're not going to be big ratings draws and that kind of thing, but couldn't we, if we could have had a dress rehearsal like that and something like this happens when it's practice, not such a big deal. We figure it all out. Now we're going to get to the regular season, and I guarantee something like this is going to happen. Do you lose your starting quarterback? Do you lose your starting left tackle? Do you lose your pass rusher? It's a big deal. Matters. And I think we kind of rushed into this, we don't need preseason. Oh, yes, we do need preseason. At least that's my view.
Well, no, I mean, I think, it would be a good kind of dry run to go through. And, without – and without the preseason, you don't find the guys like Victor Cruz. You heard Coach Lynn say, hey, I can only imagine, if it wasn't for that last preseason game and the accumulation of his performance, Austin Ekeler probably wouldn't even be on the Chargers roster right now, And so it's unbelievable, the value of preseason. And honestly, I don't know how it's going to work out, John, because we're 12 days away from the daily testing of COVID going out the window. I don't know if something else is going to be renegotiated, what the protocol is going to be. I don't even know if they're going to be tested 24 hours before game day, because there's only 4 people in the entire league that have tested positive. On September 5th, the daily testing protocol goes bye-bye. And I think part of that is because the NFL does want to kind of avoid a situation like this happening on a Saturday.
Yeah, I think something will have to come of it. Obviously, if you're going to end up playing and playing the games, like I said, maybe you can back it up, and do the testing 48 hours ahead of time. So like Ralph said, it would not have happened, just that close. And if it does, there's a possibility of saying, wait, Thursday was negative, Friday something may have showed up false positive. So there's still enough time to get it through. I think the first time it happens, we'll either see the kickoff, we'll see the game, we'll see a third game on Monday night, or we'll see something done. But past that, they're going to have to either, use whatever protocol or testing there is to get the fastest turnaround, to it, or we are going to hear breaking news, and it's not going to be, just some upset fantasy football players, and stuff. Take a look. We are in a day and age where, what's going on and what's happening out in Vegas when it comes to all these sports is now a very different way of doing business than any time in our, any of our times following it, right? It's engaged. It's admitted that it's important. It's on Fox. It's on ESPN. It's darn well made its way all the way to the NFL Network, where they talk about, the point spread and, the winners and losers, with different things like that. So can you imagine jumping on board and having, your bet down, and then all of a sudden a team starting quarterback or something not playing. If you can't change the line, that's where this will change quickly. Is let Vegas one time be on the wrong end, of the Bills playing with the third string quarterback, or something similar, and have a bunch of money go the wrong way. The NFL will not want to be a part of that, and more importantly, you won't want to put everybody out on the field. The officials, however they're going to man the cameras, and the two teams, because like we've said, you can get away with playing a doubleheader for the next couple of weeks, once a week. If you're the Cardinals, the Mets and Yankees can do it, and have some fun with it, travel back and forth an hour from one stadium to the other. We're not going to start playing 3-quarter doubleheader football games, right? Where, we're not able to say like, hey, suck it up, play on Monday and then come back and play, the second game, Friday afternoon, and then jump back 10 days later and play on Sunday again. You can't have two teams get impacted. And imagine if it's two teams in your same division, or an NFC and an AFC team, you could conflict, 4 to 6, 8 games in the coming weeks just by having two teams miss their game at some point of the season. So I think that they're going to have to give – the Players Association will have to give in on this one to say like, hey, if we all want our checks and we all want business to run as normal as possible, we're going to have to give in to some sort of creative way to keep testing. And then the NFL will probably have to say two negative tests back to back will knock out, a false positive.
Yeah, and I think the other part of the equation here too is you take a look what's happening in baseball and all these canceled games, and these athletes are like fine-tuned cars. I mean, you rev them up, then you sit them back, you rev them up. The Yankees aren't playing now. Heck, they've got they got about 10 guys on their team injured because you're revving these guys, you're revving up the engine and you're standing down. You're revving it up, you're standing it down. And I don't think the NFL can afford to do that, or you're going to continue to see injuries plague teams. To John's point, there wasn't a whole heck of a lot of action in Vegas last month, but we talked about the upsets, the unknown outcomes. We saw the Mavericks last night with a huge upset win. Last month was the first losing month in Las Vegas casinos in 13 years. They lost. And so, you are going to see this impact Vegas. You are going to see this impact the fantasy football players. A lot of angry people in fantasy football world this year. But let's shift gears a little bit on how this impacts fan attendance. Ralph, I'll go over to you. 4 NFL teams now on record saying that we'll have at least 20% fan capacity. We actually saw the Chiefs open up their training camp practice to fans, the first team that I know of. And already, the Twitter police are on there, saying, hey, we've got to shut this down. People are in the fans. They're not wearing masks. They're not following the protocol. Is this a feasible option for NFL teams? Other teams have said, hey, we're just going to shut it down. We're not going to play in front of fans. We've talked about the difficulties that they have doing the testing on the players. How does the testing with the fans happen? How does that all occur?
Well, you're not going to test fans. You're just going to have to take them at their word. You'll do a temperature check, I'm sure, at the gate. You'll require that they're wearing a mask upon entry. And really, it's going to be up to them to take some personal responsibility in how those fans act. But by getting the chance to attend the game, I hope that would inspire the fans to act appropriately. Because I think it's tremendous what the Chiefs did this weekend for their fan base. To give an opportunity, if you're a willing adult who wants to take that minimal risk, you can do it. You can come out and see the team play. They had about 2,000 there. It looked like they had about 10 people because Arrowhead is so big and massive. When you see just 2,000 people in the seats of a 75,000 seat stadium, it's wild. But I think that's great really for the fans because a real big part of football in the summertime are training camps. I know a number of teams still practice and train off-site at a college campus. Fans come to open practices. You get to see the team up close. You get autographs. It's great for that local community where the school and the training camp is located. It's great for their Chamber of Commerce for a few weeks. And a lot of these folks, sometimes they can't afford to take their son or daughter to an NFL game, but they can go to the free Bills practice at St. John Fisher College. And that's really the only access they have to the team over the course of the year. So anyway, I think it's really cool what the Chiefs did. They're giving it a try. They seem to be doing it responsibly. Obviously, a limited number of people. All the photos I saw of the people sitting in the stands, they had masks on. And I really hope that that's an opportunity that's provided to more fans across the country. We're not forcing anybody to go to a game, okay? We're not forcing you to go to a practice. You're more than welcome to hang tight and watch it on your couch. But if you're a willing adult and you understand the risk and you want to act appropriately to minimize the risk of transmission of the virus, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to have that opportunity now at the end of August. With this pandemic has already been around for 6 months. So I think we have to start trying to take baby steps back into normal life, so to speak. I wanted to say about the what John was talking about. You know, we're going to have to accept as football fans this year that it may not be the best quote unquote product. It's still going to be tremendously exciting. There's still going to be unbelievable plays and, world-class athletes competing, but we may have to accept that there'll be a Sunday where Patrick Mahomes is not starting for the Kansas City Chiefs because of a false positive or a testing snafu. And we're not going to be able to cancel the game. You can't get away with that in football like you can in baseball. As John mentioned, we're not playing 3-quarter doubleheaders here. So you're just going to have to accept that player, you're going to lose that player for the day, and it may not be the best quote-unquote product because the MVP is not playing, but there are still going to be 46 other guys out there who are professionals, who are getting paid, who will put on a show, and you're going to have to accept the result of the game. That's just some of the compromise and concession that we're going to have to make for playing football during a pandemic. So the NFL is going to pull it off. They're going to play, but it may not be all honky-dory, so to speak, but it's still going to be worthwhile, in my opinion, for the fans. And it's going to be worthwhile for the players, too, because they're going to make the money that they are entitled to. So, yep, I'll throw it back to you, Rick, here.
Yeah,
I'll
hey,
the remainder of my time to the show host.
Well, no, there's $9 billion in play here, and that's why it's all going on. But you talk about the quality of the on-field product. It also applies to the fan experience, not just in person, Neil, but also the television broadcast. You see different television networks experimenting with fake crowd noise, no crowd noise. I know the Yankees broadcast, it's just like a hum, and then you see the NBA, they're getting creative with virtual fans. I mean, you see some of the highlights, you forget almost. I do. Anyway, I'm like, oh, it looks like there's fans there, but it's really just virtual fans. The start of the 4 NFL teams allowing fans to come and attend games, good idea, bad idea. Will we see an increase of that? And how do you like watching some of these sports without having fans? Do you like crowd ambiance? Do you prefer hearing the plays being called out at the line of scrimmage? And I could only imagine Peyton Manning in a pandemic world screaming his Oklahoma at the line of scrimmage and how that comes across on a TV production broadcast.
I'll tell you, I mean, as a Saints fan, I was really counting on, the Who Dat Nation coming up strong against Tom Brady in Week 1 in the Superdome. That's not going to happen this year, and that's really discouraging. I think the fans are an integral part of the experience and an integral part of the gameplay. There's so many times when a quarterback can't hear his offensive line can't hear the plays being called and whatever, and that does enter into the competition. I will say this. I know months ago, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell was talking about, hey, listen, if we're going to have another stimulus, part of that's going to be that we're going to limit the lawsuits that people can enter into. And, Ralph and John are both attached to major conferences, franchises, what have you. I'm not, so I can say it. There's got to be a way to limit liability. I think that liability is the major reason why the Big Ten's not playing, why the Pac-12's not playing, why the MAC's not playing, why so many other conferences and teams are reluctant to really dip into this. They all want the fans involved. And listen, it's an incredible income stream that we're going to see. We're going to see there's going to be a chain reaction from not having this stream of income coming in. And everyone talks about, hey, look how greedy they are and what have you. If your team can't afford your star player because the salary cap went down, that impacts you as a fan. Again, you have to look at this in a comprehensive way. And I don't know what the solution is, and I don't know if both parties could ever get on one page to where they'd be willing to do something like this to kind of limit it. But I think our entire American business climate as well, not just sports, but across the landscape is going to be impacted because of the liability litigation exposure potentially. And I guess until something like that happens, teams, stadiums, conferences, what have you, are going to be very reluctant to bring fans in because there's going to be someone in there looking to sock it to the team or sock it to the conference or sock it to the stadium or whatever for the risk that they incurred voluntarily. And that's a frustrating aspect of it. Fans are so important, and yet there are going to be some that are going to come in that are trying to be opportunistic. And that's, unfortunately, the fact of life, but it's no less discouraging.
And as you were talking, Neil, I just saw the news come down the wire from the New Jersey lab BioReference on August 22nd, which was 2 days ago. The reason for the false positives was due to contamination. So they have confirmed that all of the initial 77 positives were all false. They got it under control. But as you can see, John, it took 2 days to figure out. So I guess parting shot here, what is the solution? If you have a bunch of false positives, do you say, hey, no big deal. You take the Miami Marlins approach. We'll have a team vote. And if the players decide it's all good, we'll just go out there and play. Does the NFL and NFLPA need to kind of put their heads together and say, hey, what if this does happen in season? Where do we go from here?
Yeah, I think that's going to have to be the part. One is, how are we going to continue, to keep the testing flatlined, in this scenario. You're also going to see some guys who, they're not going to believe everything they're hearing, right? They didn't want to believe, you see guys talking about the face mask and what they do or don't want to do. You see guys in there that aren't sure. They're just doing it because they've been told by their agent or their teammates or their significant other, like, hey, probably should go play. I think it'll be an interesting scenario to see, if you don't treat this the right way, will there ever come a time that someone else that you don't want to lose opts out, right? Because the false positives will make certain people nervous, right? And if you saw, you've seen the stuff, there's a lot of people that are talking about it from a, different perspective. But then you see Andrew Wentworth and his family talking about how they all got it. And they all got it from something as simple as someone associated with their family going out and picking up lunch. No way to know how it got tracked or how it got, then disseminated. But it was something as simple as going out and getting something to eat. And we've already seen in Major League Baseball, 2 guys are at home, not with their team because they decided to go hit the town, after their game, in all likelihood, that's what they were doing. You've seen it happen in the NBA where a guy had to go back into quarantine by, stepping over the line and grabbing his Uber, and another one having to do it because, he got some high-priced wings and maybe other, but that's kind of have to be what you have to think is that they may test on a Thursday for a Sunday game. If you're on the road in certain cities that are on phase 3 or phase 4, and the city you're in is still stuck at phase 2, how will those players act in the 24 to 48 hours before the game? Because it could be as simple as trying to get your normal meal or go get something, that's very, nondescript. It doesn't have to be that they're out at the bar or they're out doing something, they shouldn't be. It can be as simple as doing something casual that can bring that into your building. And if so, now we're going to have something that, like we said, in football, this will go and create chaos immediately. That will be much harder to fix than any of these other sports. So I think our bottom line answer is whether we hear about it or not, the two sides are going to have to agree that some form of continued testing is probably the smart way to go.
You're tuned into the State of Football here, brought to you by the NFL Draft Bible. We're here each and every weekday, 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern, breaking down the hot topics and football debates that you want to hear about. Today, I'm joined by John Murphy of the Toronto Argonauts, Ralph Ventry from the Northeast Conference, and Neil Stratton from Inside the League. And Neil, I'm going to shift gears with you a little bit here because on your Succeed in Football blog, you had an interesting poll on former agents, and the whole COVID situation has impacted how agents recruit college players. And, I thought there were some interesting tidbits in there that I'll let you kind of delve into, but I thought the most fascinating statistic of the poll, to me anyway, was 80% of agents didn't deem their time as an agent as successful or a failure. It was basically just kind of a plateau. Yet, I think it was close to 50% or 42% said if they did get back into the business, they thought maybe they could be successful, but there was a handful of guys that put it at 50-50. The point being, the agent business was tough to begin with. You throw this whole pandemic into it, it's a whole nother monkey wrench into the equation. What are some of the things that were revealing to you in terms of that poll that you conducted with former NFL agents?
It was interesting. I thought there were a number of things that they responded differently from how I expected. They were all passionate about the game. That didn't surprise me. But I think there were two areas where I think most agents felt like if they had this, they could have succeeded. Number one, if they were attached to a major agency that had a client list that would allow the players they recruited to trust them more, they would have been successful. But more importantly, it's the finances, it's the money. It's become such a tremendous barrier to entry, especially over the last 10 to 15 years as player expectations have increased. The per diems, the training costs, the ancillary costs like the rental cars and the nicer accommodations and what have you. And it's the kind of thing that fans don't ever think about. Quite frankly, it doesn't really affect them. But on the business side, it's really become a difficult thing. And I think to some degree, you can make the argument, I make the argument, that the NFLPA has devalued the better agencies, the better agents, the job that they do. I think that in many cases, players don't understand exactly what kind of a value add a good contract advisor is and what they provide. And unfortunately, I don't think that's getting any better. And simultaneously, costs are going higher, driving more and more of them out of the business. But another point I thought that was interesting about it was about half the people that we polled said they don't have, well, not half, but a great percentage, I think about a third or a fourth said, I don't have any interest in the game at all anymore. But about another half said, my interest is stoked even higher. The thing about this, and I think all of us can answer this because we're all in football, we're passionate about what we do. Once you get in the game, it's very hard to leave the game. It's an addiction. It is something that it's more than a passion. And a lot of people, they're faced with potentially divorce, bankruptcy, litigation, all those kind of things. Maybe it drives them out of the game, but they never stop thinking, man, if just these two things could have happened differently, I'd be up there. I'd be up there with the Rosenhauses and the Condons and what have you. And I thought that was interesting. It didn't surprise me that passion never, that fire never burns out, because it's still America's number one game, guys. And if you get a chance to look behind the curtain and be part of the action rather than just watching the action, it's something you never forget.
Yeah, and I think that line is so fine between being ultimately so successful and just struggling, especially from the agent business. It takes one guy to change the game, and all of a sudden you can be at the pinnacle of your industry. And I think that's what the agents continue to chase, and the players continue to chase that professional career. Ralph, I mean, the education of the decision making ahead for these players in this cycle. You talk about, the FCS not producing as many NFL players, but there still is a handful of players that do have NFL aspirations. And I saw your tweet yesterday. Wagner alone from the NEC has 4 guys currently in the NFL. So, there's a handful of guys from the Northeast Conference playing in the NFL. But now, if there is a spring season, they will have to decide whether to pursue their college career, return if there is no spring season, and then be put together with the next year's incoming senior class, or pursue that professional career. I guess my question is, what can a conference do to kind of help educate players to make these right decisions in these uncharted waters? I mean, the decision they make can ultimately impact them for the rest of their lives here.
Without a doubt. And that's why you want these student athletes to understand the amount of research that they should be doing, and the amount of rationalizing they should do. Unfortunately, I think a lot of players out there have somewhat of a twisted
perception
image of themselves. They think they're a lot better than they are. Not everyone is an NFL prospect. Certainly not everyone at the FCS level is an NFL prospect. But for those who are, you want to make sure that before you make one of these decisions, that you have considered everything. You put everything on the table, and you've listened to a number of people, not just one person. Don't just listen to an agent. Don't just listen to a high school coach. Don't just listen to some hanger-on in your hometown. Get everybody's opinion together and then analyze it. Because like you said, it's an extremely important decision. And personally, in an uncertain time, I would take the certainty of a college degree and move from there. Now, if I'm a Trey Lance at North Dakota State, that's a whole different ballgame. But we're talking 20 to 30 people, 20 to 30 players, not even who are in that class at the FCS level. Everybody else really should just hang tight for now. The other thing I would say is, I know in the NEC we have some great head coaches with tremendous life experience and tremendous football experience. And believe me, they're not going to intentionally steer you wrong. They want what's best for you, and they know how to do it. And I go back to this example all the time because Chris Valerial at St. Francis, Pennsylvania, he was a Division II player in the PSAC. He got drafted. He had an 11-year career in the NFL, all as a starter. He was a 2-time All-Pro, coming from a small school. This guy understands the whole process. He's seen it all. Listen to him. He's going to tell you the truth. If he thinks that you can go out and you're going to get signed, he's probably right. If he says that, hey, pump the brakes, wait another year, I'd listen to his advice. And unfortunately, I know there have been a couple talented players in the NEC who it just didn't work out well for them because they didn't listen to that reliable, level-headed advice. And maybe they didn't work as hard in some aspects. And maybe they thought things were just going to come easier or more naturally. But the bottom line is, don't jump to a rash decision. And if you are a top 100 prospect for the NFL draft, your decision-making, you're in a lot different state than 95% of the FCS football players. With that said, I don't know if there will be spring football in the Northeast Conference. I know the SWAC has announced the spring schedule. The NEC presidents have not yet officially signed off on a complete cancellation of the fall yet. They've postponed. They will reconvene sometime within the next 2 or 3 weeks and make a final decision on fall. And then if the answer is no fall competition, I'm sure they'll be exploring ways to compete in the spring. But there are a lot of obstacles to navigate when we're talking about moving fall sports into the spring, in addition with spring sports, and also the NCAA basketball tournament, which winter into spring. And really the elephant in the room is the fact that the NCAA basketball tournament is essential to the financial stability of the NCAA. And without a basketball tournament, without that television revenue for the second year in a row, I don't even want to imagine what will happen to intercollegiate athletics. So we have to find a way to play this basketball tournament safely. You're going to have that, which is a priority. You're going to have spring sports athletes who missed out on competing last year, and now you're going to throw a number of fall sports into the mix. It could be a chaotic spring, to say the least. With that said, we're trying in every way we can to make sure that student athletes get some form of competition during this academic year. We want to see that. I hope it's feasible.
Yeah, people don't realize the basketball, the Final Four was taken away. The Frozen Four was taken away. And before they go and cancel those two things, that's a priority for the NCAA before they get the football season up and running. But a lot can happen between now and then, John. And this conversation is really valuable to any players out there that are listening to this show right now, because it reminds me of a conversation that I had just yesterday where I was on the phone with an agent, and he's recruiting a player that's trying to make this decision. And again, I want to emphasize it's important to keep your options open because so much can happen between now and then. But he's talking to the parents. He's going through the vetting process. And the parents are saying, well, you're the only agent telling us that our son should return to school for another season. He goes, well, because I get my information from the NFL teams. The NFL teams are telling me that he's a borderline day 3 priority free agent, and he could benefit from playing another season. Oh, well, the other agents are telling us he's going to get drafted. Well, yeah, it might be what you want to hear, but where is that information coming from? Is it coming from reliable sources, or are they telling you that because they have their best interests of trying to obtain a client that's going to play in the league? So maybe they're fudging the truth a little bit. But, John, I think it's very relevant to what goes on every day and what's going to continue to go on every day, especially with players who are participating in conferences who do not have a fall league. These are the types of conversations that are happening frequently.
Oh, no doubt. And Ralph mentioned, exactly the point that we've been making. When you start thinking about without the NCAA getting clearance or providing updated information to say in this pandemic era, and if they are at the point of no return financially, are they allowed to at this time decide to say we can play football, the NCAA tournament, like literally say, if you are a money-making sport, we can do it in the calendar year of 2020 and 2021. If you are a non-money-making sport, you'll return to action as soon as we can deal with it and have it be productive for the entire university. Because if not, again, we're talking about resources, accessibility, and can you put all these student athletes back safely in the dorms, in the recreational areas, in the cafeterias, in the interaction on campus, or can you only do it for a certain number of people and then the cutoff is the cutoff? And what will happen if you try to play men's sports that make money and then try not to play certain men's sports, female sports, and Olympic sports are not given that opportunity to play in the spring or the fall or whenever their seasons are, because you just can't have that number of players and people. You got to get them tested. You have to have enough, staff around. You then have to have enough trainers. You need enough equipment managers. Then you need to do all the cleanup that's associated with that. And the cleanup of a football locker room is one thing. When you're talking about the cleanup of interaction in a cafeteria, in the study halls, imagine Olympic, stuff is a swimming pool. And, you're talking about millions of dollars that would be spent just to test and clean. If you're talking about them having a struggle to get 100 players and the staff and people there, how are you talking about doing that with thousands of students? And I guarantee you, ESPN and all the other networks are not going to allow the NCAA basketball tournament to be figured out in a game of horse to get it over and done with in 5 minutes, right? They're not going to throw all the frozen, the Frozen Four are not going to get on the ice and do a quick shootout to develop a national champion, right? You're not going to be able to just come up with an idea of shoot one foul shot, take a slap shot, go run a 40-yard dash, and somebody go do a beam routine for gymnastics, and you figure out 9 national champions, in an Olympic style, one event for each sport, right? Like that stuff is not happening. So if you're going to try to play all these sports, the money and the just pure optics of trying to get all of those kids on campus, and we'll leave out the idea of all of them being academically eligible by time that comes. But the idea of being able to do that is forget about frustrating. I think it's a no-win scenario, for people, because they'd either have to adapt and allow the sports that will cover the bill for everyone to play and just have an understanding that this has nothing to do with, Title IX whatsoever, or you're not going to be able to get that all done without facing lawsuits, but from a different perspective of kids saying, why was my child, or why are certain student athletes given prominent roles and opportunity to do what they're doing, and other kids are being restricted and kept back, even with the premise that they all have that extra year? For some of these athletes, and we've mentioned them, if you're in an Olympic sport, there is no extra year. You're on target. You've been on target for your entire life for a certain time and date. The same thing, your baseball draft, your basketball draft, your football draft, even hockey, you're on a time frame that an extra year, depending on who you are, you don't want to hear about an extra year. That's why no one wants to redshirt anymore. They want 3-and-out options and they want 1-and-out options. You can't just dictate things across the board unless you're going to come out with a scenario. And we haven't seen the NCAA be able to take care of one sport efficiently. Projecting them to do all of this by the spring, that's a little far-fetched for me.
Well, final word, I'll go over to Neil Stratton, because, just listening to us try to talk it out on the air here, we've talked about the difficulties from a team point of view and even a conference point of view, but just from an NCAA point of view, to have in the March, April area, all of a sudden a Final Four championship, a Frozen Four playoffs, and then, oh, by the way, we're going to try to squeeze in the college football playoffs too and all these other sports. It doesn't even seem feasible.
We've been wish casting about the football season for 2 or 3 months now, and I don't think anyone ever really got together and said, if we're going to have football, this is going to have to happen. We're going to think about these things. Ralph talked about the NCAA tournament. I'm not a huge basketball fan, but I understand its importance. We've got to right now start tackling all these issues and getting everything lined out so that we don't run into this kind of chaos again in 2 months, 3 months, whatever. It's too important. And I think we've gotten used to this idea that we can all sit in our homes and everything's going to work out and we can pause things. That's not the case. This is a chain reaction, and we're all involved, from the smallest fan to the biggest athlete to the biggest commissioner, what have you. We've all got to work together and do our parts and be smart about this and learn to take a few risks and understand that we're never going to be in a completely risk-free environment. And that, I hate to be overly melodramatic, but our way of life is at stake to some degree, certainly for all 4 people that are on this call. So I'm hopeful that we can really remedy things. I'm really rooting for the SEC and the ACC and the Big 12 to have as close to a smooth season as possible. Obviously, I'm rooting for the NFL to succeed. There is a lot more at stake here than just what we do on Saturdays and Sundays.
No doubt about it. We got a few minutes left to play around with. I'm going to stick with you, Neil, because your new book, Scout Speak, is officially released now on Amazon. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And we have a batch coming here to the Jersey Shore because we are going to be doing Scout Speak book giveaways throughout the week here on the State of Football. So make sure you tune in all week long on how to win a free book. We're going to do that here throughout the week. We are anticipating that delivery coming sometime during the week. We will give out several books, but Neil, take us inside to the development, the makings of it all. I know the quarantine, you had a lot of time at home to kind of put this thing together. Take us through some of the highlights.
It was a lot of fun putting it together, Rick, because as you alluded to, I got to March and April, and I'm like, what am I going to do with all this time? And I had always been had some loose ends on other stuff. So I had a lot of quotes and stories and all these kind of things. And I just kind of beefed it up and talking to people. And I think everyone on this call right now wish that they could work in football. For me, this has been a lifelong dream. I was able to get there by God's grace. And we talk a lot to people. I love origin stories. I love hearing about how people got started and kind of the twists of fate that led to them having a lengthy career and be able to kind of make their dreams come true. We do a lot of that in the book. And we talk to a lot of scouts. A lot of people are really fascinated with the idea of being a full-time NFL evaluator and kind of calling the shots and sitting in war rooms and hearing the stories and knowing the things that the rank and file fan doesn't know. We did a lot to talk about scouts, people that are kind of household names now, and how they started off very humbly and never knew that they would get into this, and really kind of just due to a couple of things that they didn't even expect to happen that they did. And so I hope that people that read the book are inspired and they can hopefully will find their own path to what making their NFL dreams come true. That would be really fulfilling to me if that were to happen. But we made it $12.95 because we don't want it to be too expensive. We made it about 144 pages. It's something you can read while you're on a flight. It's not something that's long and cumbersome. We don't use a lot of big words because I don't know a lot of big words. So it's a pretty easy read.
Well, I will say, your first book, Moving the Chains, you did a great job of taking a lot of in-depth and complex issues like we do here on the State of Football and putting them into layman's terms so that the common person, the person that wants to work in football, the parent that wants to learn about the draft process can read it and understand it in a manner where it makes sense. And I'm looking forward to it. I read the first book you put out in one sitting, cover to cover. And I'm sure I'll do the same thing with this book. I'll go up to the beach here at the Jersey Shore and sit down and read it. And John actually shared a great story that we got enormous amount of feedback from last week in terms of his beginnings. And you can go back and watch the State of Football. I'm going to put Ralph Ventry on the spot here and have him deliver a story. Take us back to the young Ralph Ventry and how you got involved in the football business, Ralph.
Well, actually, my first experience with football, I didn't play in high school, but I was the public address announcer for our high school team. And actually, my entry into athletics came through basketball. I was a basketball manager at Fordham. I worked a lot of exposure camps and clinics in the summers. And that got me into the athletic department, into the athletic field. My first real experience with college football was I did an internship in the equipment room for one summer. So I worked football camp. I was up there at 4:30 in the morning, putting out all the pads and tackling dummies and such. I learned how to pump air into a helmet and all that stuff. And it led to eventually getting a degree at Fordham. I worked at Manhattan College. I came to the Northeast Conference, and I had the opportunity to do the PR for NEC football right off the bat. So this would have been my 14th season as NEC football's publicity director. Unfortunately, that's on hold right now, the 14th season, but hopefully it will come to fruition at some point. I just wanted to touch on, before we close it down, on a couple of those topics about the NCAA. First, what John was saying, philosophically, the NEC and other conferences, our mission is really about providing opportunities in an equitable fashion. So we may run into some trouble if you're talking about only playing one sport over the other. At the end of the day, the NEC and other leagues are mid-major leagues. We're not for profit in New Jersey. So like I said, we're more in the higher education realm. So I don't know how we could say, yeah, the bowling team, you can't play right now, but it's safe to play basketball. It gets sticky. With that said, the NCAA, the financial model, is heavily reliant on basketball television money. And for all the heat that the NCAA takes and all the criticism, which is that sometimes unfair, the NCAA, for the most part, is revenue neutral. The NCAA does not see any money from football. All the CFP is an entirely separate financial entity. It is not affiliated with the NCAA. The football television deals are not negotiated and signed by the NCAA. The television deals are on a conference-by-conference basis. So football money goes directly to the conferences and the schools. The SEC signs a deal with CBS and ESPN for hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's an agreement between the league, the conference, the SEC, and the network. The NCAA does not get a dime off of that. The NCAA makes the bulk of its money off of the basketball tournament, and like I said, they're revenue neutral. Yes, the NCAA takes in $1 billion per year of revenue, but that $1 billion is then shared and distributed to conferences. It is used to fund the entire operations of the national office. It is used to fund the Division II playoffs and the Division III softball tournament. All of that comes from the basketball money. Oh, and it goes to pay, protect against lawsuits as well, because the NCAA faces a number of lawsuits on an annual basis. So the NCAA is taking the money that it takes in, it's spending, it's giving back to its members. So don't think that they're just sitting on a pile of money. If the NCAA does not take in this money this year, there will be some major problems. So don't think that they have the printing press and that they can just start printing $50 bills whenever Mark Emmert says we need money. That ain't happening, folks. But But with that said, I think that they've had a tremendous amount of time, and they have some really bright minds out at the national office in Indianapolis, and they will find a way to safely compete with winter sports, and we will have an NCAA basketball tournament. And that NCAA basketball tournament, because we host that, we'll be able to provide so many opportunities to Division 1, 2, and 3 student athletes across the country.
Well, I'm not sure Mark Emmert is one of those bright minds in the NCAA office, but, I hope they do get it right, because it's going to lead to John. I'll let you wrap things up here. We have two great guests here today that leave us with a lot to think about, and we'll be back tomorrow at 9 a.m. to discuss it. But we've already seen some sports affiliations go by the wayside. If what Ralph is saying is true, we could see colleges and universities entirely go away as a result.
Yeah, and that's what I said. I mean, at some point in time, this is going to become something that needs to be addressed, or at least fundamentally looked at levels above just talking about sports and how it's impacting major universities. We've mentioned it in a lot of different ways, but when you have major sports, at colleges being talked about as the only way or the predominant moneymaker, and without them, where do they go? And not just for the student athletes, but just for the students. And you look at a lot of the things that are provided and available, at most universities stem from some sports club, being the the major moneymaker. And even when you go down to lower levels, of colleges, it becomes normally a different sport. There's other schools that it's not just football, or basketball. There's other universities that are major, their profit centers come from lacrosse, or come from their female sports, or come from, having Olympic pools and having Olympic, trials and things on their campus. And if these things are not available, if there's competition for time slotting and scheduling and fields, and the testing, and we've mentioned that across the board. Anything that goes on now, they're pushing the football is to make sure that they can play and see what could happen with basketball and beyond. And I think it's going to be a very, every day, like we talked about, Notre Dame, when are you getting back on the field? If you're playing a game in 2 to 3 weeks, how much practice time are you going to have, or how long until we have to see a potential change in schedule, with them, in terms of just giving these kids enough time to, make sure that what we don't, end up seeing is, we know about the COVID risk, but now we've talked about it in those other sports. There has been a major player lost thus far in all these other sports. Do you really want to see that happen to a collegiate athlete? Right? It's one thing to get your contract and be playing and then suffer a major injury. God forbid, we've mentioned the COVID aspect of it, but would we see a guy at a major university this year try to play, and because of the quick turnaround with return to action, or the practices being halted several times because of this, and somebody goes out there and has a catastrophic injury that costs them to ever play or lose their draft status completely? Okay, hopefully that guy and his family have had conversations with Big Daddy and are covered, but the money can't make up for the loss of never being able to play again. The money can't make up for never getting drafted, or missing out on that lifelong opportunity to actually be or play, in the NFL. That's the next thing that we're all excited to see football happen and play. It's terrible to see an NFL guy get hurt during these training camps in the next 2 weeks when they start putting pads and helmets and stuff on. It'll be really devastating to see a kid get hurt this fall because we're trying to play a college football season because of money, right? That's going to be the difference maker here, is not only getting through the season. What are we going to be willing to accept as all the risks associated with playing the season, not just COVID related, off the field, but COVID related on the field. Because it's one thing to say we can fix, something at the NFL level or professional sports. What are you doing with that same question Ralph asked 24 hours before LSU is playing Alabama? If a star player cannot play, what will the result of that be?
Well, it's been another hour of power. We could probably break it down for another hour. And as you were talking, Ralph made a great point in the chat room. $40 million the NCAA projects as costs for fall testing. We'll be back at it again tomorrow to break it all down, continue these enlightening conversations, 9 a.m. each and every day. Big shout out to all of our panel. Neil Stratton, his new book, Scout Speak. Make sure you go to Amazon and get that now. We'll be giving out books throughout the week. Of course, he's in Houston. Ralph's in Jersey with the Northeast Conference there. We thank Ralph Ventry for his time today. John Murphy, welcome back home there in New Orleans. And back to the country. We'll be joined with John tomorrow. And we'll also be joined by Ted Jackson, the author of You Ought to Write a Story About Me, the story of Jackie Wallace. Ralph mentioned depression, alcoholism, suicide, homelessness, all the other effects of the COVID world and what they mean to society. We're going to talk more about that tomorrow, I should say, with another enlightening guest. For Rick Saratella and the NFL Draft Bible,